Alright, everybody, this is AW, Hyperion, the Green Pea Giant, Josho, and today we're looking at a book I had never heard of, by someone I have never heard of, but I haven't heard about a lot of good things. It's On Populist Reason by Ernesto Laclau. Apparently somebody had some argumentative differences with Zizek, and according to Joshua, this
Yeah,
was
Laclau.
something kind of written against Zizek, or?
Yeah, Laclau dislikes Zizek or disliked Zizek. He died. Zizek likes Laclau though. It was just a one-way disagreement, I guess. I don't know about specifically what, but we'll find out, I guess. That's why we're here.
Well, anyways, apparently it's a disagreement about populism. So,
This book isn't actually about Zizek very much, though I do believe they've had debates about populism.
well, whatever way, it's fine. Let's take a look at this book. We're starting with chapter 2. Well, because chapter 1 seems to just basically be rebuttals and refuting basic notions of populism. And at least just from what I skimmed from chapter 2, it seems interesting that apparently Laclau is, at least in this chapter, interested in considering how populism actually works. So he's going over somebody whose name is Gustave Le Bon's theory from his famous book I'd never heard of, called The Crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently it's a theory about, well, how populism works. So this actually seems to have some material use for organization, for considerations of practice, things important to the left. So let's get to it. Chapter 2, Le Bon, Suggestion in Distorted Representations. Gustave Le Bon's famous book, The Crowd, is located at an intellectual crossroads. In one sense, it is an extreme version of the way the 19th century addressed the new phenomena of mass psychology as belonging to the pathological realm. However, it no longer considers such phenomena as contingent aberrations destined to disappear. They have become permanent features of modern society. As such, they cannot be dismissed and summarily condemned, but have to become the object of a new technology of power. Quote, crowds are somewhat like objects of a new... Quote, crowds are somewhat like the Sphinx of ancient fable. It is necessary to arrive at a solution of the problems offered by their psychology, or to resign ourselves to being devoured by them. In order to carry out... end quote. In order to carry out this scientific endeavor, Le Bon drew the most systematic picture of mass psychology which had yet been offered, a picture which met with instantaneous and lasting success and was admired by many people, Freud among them. The keynote of his analysis was the notion of suggestion, to which we will return later. Our point of departure, however, will be the consideration of how suggestion operates, according to Le Bon, in a limited terrain, that of images, words, and formulas, because here he touches a set of issues which will be crucial to my discussion of populism in part 2 of this book. So it seems like an earlier work that, or maybe something that was also contemporary to Edward Bernays, the nephew of Freud, who literally is given the credit for beginning the whole propaganda industry, which obviously has to do entirely with mass psychology. So very, very connected, very, very much something of interest to people in power. To capitalists, the one thing they care about most is has to be mass psychology. You know, it's what marketing is all about. It's what politicians, the way they phrase themselves, the way they portray themselves, has everything to do with considerations of mass psychology.
The Crowd was written in late 19th century, so
So it
it
must have been
influenced
before
Freud
Bernays.
himself. Yeah, it was definitely before Bernays.
Yeah, definitely during this period, the late 19th century, there was a lot of anxiety about society. People thought it was going to collapse in on itself. People were, terrified by this new popular culture. It's why, writers like Nietzsche were popping up.
Continuing for Le Bon, the key to the influence that words exercise is the formation of a crowd. In the formation of a crowd is to be found in the images that those words evoke, quite independently of their signification. Quote, the power of words is bound up with the images they evoke and is quite independent of their real significance. Words whose sense is the most ill-defined are sometimes those that possess the most influence. Such, for example, are the terms democracy, socialism, equality, liberty, etc., whose meaning is so vague that bulky volumes do not suffice to fix it precisely. Yet it is certain that a truly magical power is attached to those short syllables. As if they contain the solution of all problems, they synthesize the most diverse and unconscious aspirations in the hope of their realization. End quote. Well, I can't disagree with that. Yeah, and I mean, he's saying this both in its positive senses as well as negative senses. It's not just like, it's only the stupid people who get scared by the words socialism. It's also stupid people who buy into the word socialism and go and think that socialism is really going to deliver utopia. So cuts both ways.
I think it also has to do with how meaningless of a word socialist is, because, pretty much everyone amongst the political spectrum has labeled themselves a socialist. Marx is a socialist, Napoleon III is a socialist, Hitler's a socialist, everyone's a socialist. It means nothing.
Vladimir Putin is a socialist and communist.
Barack Hussein Obama is a socialist who hates America.
Yep. Continuing, in contemporary theoretical terms, we could say that Le Bon is making allusions here to two well-known phenomena: the unifixity of the relation between signifier and signified, in Le Bon's terms, the relation between words and images, and the process of overdetermination by which a particular word condenses around itself a plurality of meanings. For Le Bon, however, this association of images is not an essential component of language as such, but a perversion of it. Words have a true significance which is incompatible with the function of synthesizing a plurality of unconscious aspirations. A strong frontier separating what language truly is from its perversion by the crowd is the unquestioned presupposition of his entire analysis. So, no fan of the relativizing of mass comprehension. I mean, I suppose we can sympathize with that because we also think there are objective meanings, but unlike seemingly, he says language has, words have what is it? Words have a true significance which is incompatible with the function of synthesizing a plurality of unconscious aspirations. I would say that's exactly the opposite of what I think. That words as words exactly have no significance. It's just a string of letters. What has objective significance is concepts.
Yeah. What is thought when you see those words together?
Yeah, structures of intelligibility, structures of thinking. But whether banana today means, that fruit, or banana tomorrow means like some kind of shitty hipster car, it's not the abuse of language. It's just how language works. Language is very shifty. It seems that it really takes a very big effort to try to keep language from shifting because it naturally shifts.
Yeah, a lot of professors now, I don't want to get on a tear again, but they have in universities have been championing like text speak as legitimate. And while I'm not like I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to language, but I don't know. I don't have an established position really. It's just something to think about. Like I think that language might become so obscure that, you know, if I don't know what someone's talking about, then I want established rules to be able to understand other people. I mean, most of our problems in life are miscommunication already. And I just see like making new words uh, or making words mean different things. For example, a small example would be literally now means figuratively because they have taken it out of its literal context and put it in a figurative context that means or yeah, figuratively. Like I literally died or something. That means I figuratively died or whatever. I hated that. Which is fine. We all know what that means, but to do that with words that literally, and I'm using literally in the literal sense, mean the opposite of what they are then taken to mean, language becomes obscured, and then we just lose all sense of being able to understand one another.
Um,
Thoughts?
I think the whole thing about literally is probably like kind of an ironic thing. Must have been when it evolved.
Perhaps.
I don't think language necessarily becomes more obscure as it evolves,
No,
however,
I don't think it does.
because, the reason it evolves is because people understand it. People are using words differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the words shift, but the structures, so long as the structures are discernible, it's understandable. However, like when a word that means something to you starts meaning a word something different to someone else, it does obscure communication heavily.
Yeah, definitely.
And
I think,
people become married. People become married to words quite
Yeah.
strongly. I mean, look at how in philosophy, oh, I'm a materialist, I'm an idealist. And they overlook the structures that they're talking about. They may literally be talking about the exact same thing, just calling it by a different name.
Yeah, we observe this in the left a lot with these terms that are applied to things.
I think Hegel definitely got it right about the relationship between words and the concepts. He always cared more about the concept, the structure that he was discussing. So he always, of course, discusses, other words you could apply to the structure, and he gives his reasoning for why he applied a certain word for the structure he's discussing. And he's very precise. He makes sure he's very clear with what structure he's discussing, he's describing.
Yep. Continuing in contemporary theoretical terms, we could say that Le Bon is making allusion here to oh, I already read that. I think we were in the middle there. For Le Bon, however, this association of images are an essential component of language as such, but a perversion of it. Words have a true significance, a strong frontier separating what language truly is from its perversion by the crowd is the unquestioned presupposition of style analysis. Okay. Sorry, I lost my place there. Continuing, given the arbitrariness of the association between words and images, any rationality is excluded from their mutual articulation. Quote, reason and argument are incapable of combating certain words and formulas. They are uttered with solemnity in the presence of crowds, and as soon as they have been pronounced, an expression of respect is visible on every countenance, and all heads are bowed. By many, they are considered as natural forces, as supernatural powers. They evoke grandiose and vague images in men's minds, but this very vagueness that wraps them in obscurity augments their mysterious power. All words and all formulas do not possess the power of evoking images, while there are some which have once had this power but lost it in the course of use and ceased to awaken any response in the mind. They have become vain sounds whose principal utility is to relieve the person who employs them of the obligation of thinking. Continuing, here we see the limits of the explanation that Le Bon thinks it necessary to provide. His analysis does not try to detect, as Freud's will, the inner logic governing the association between words and images, only to describe its differences from a rationality conceived in terms of a purely denotative signification. Since the association between words and images is entirely arbitrary, it varies from time to time and from country to country. If any particular language, if any particular language be studied, it is seen that the words of which it is composed change rather slowly in the course of the ages, while the images these words evoke or the meaning attached to them change ceaselessly. It is precisely the words most often employed by the masses which among different peoples possess the most different meanings. Such is the case, for instance, with the words democracy and socialism in such a frequent use nowadays. You can add rights to that, and justice, and good.
Yeah. Freedom. Love, even.
I mean, actually, like, he's wrong there in that these things are like, it's it is, and it's not the most common words that people use. It just has to do with categorical words, which happen to actually really be about concepts, and it's precisely the fact that they are really about concepts, and that there is no agreement about what concept they're actually talking about, that makes them so vague. So, if democracy is just, it's the self-determination of peoples by votes, democracy can be many things. It can be councilist, it can be authoritarian, it can be bourgeois, it can be proletarian, it can be socialist, it can be capitalist. So, you could say that's a vagueness of democracy, but at the same time, the question is, well, it is rightly vague, and these different forms are, depending on what we're talking about, they can be concretizations or more concrete versions of the same kind of thing.
Hmm. But no matter what democracy we're discussing, it's always a mistake.
Yeah.
Continuing, and from there, Le Bon, as a true new Machiavelli, gives a piece of advice to politicians. Quote, one of the most essential functions of statesmen consists then in baptizing with popular, or at any rate, indifferent words, things which the crowd cannot endure under their old names. The power of words is so great that it suffices to designate in a well-chosen terms the most odious things to make them acceptable to the crowds. End quote. And if that was a piece of advice, they certainly took it.
Yeah.
Socialism, perfect example. Originally, means a good thing. Nowadays, for most people here, at least in the U.S., it means like the worst thing you could possibly call someone.
Oh. Okay, I have an example. There's a song by Waka Flocka Flame called Hard in Da Paint, right? Hard in Da Paint? You've heard the song? Okay, so there's a radio edit of the word that cuts out like most of the vulgar language, and it changes it with ridiculous words, like it's not just bleeping, like it puts in words that don't fit or something. It's called boulderization. It's named after Boulder. He was a guy, old guy, 1700s, I think. So someone commented on it saying that it was uh, evidence of how America has become brutal and communist. Not okay, like communism obviously does not mean this, but the things that the thing that I was thinking is who was the one who wanted to boulderize everything? Tipper Gore. She wanted the parental advisory stickers, radio friendly music, and so on. Is she a communist? No, of course not. But that's like making everything radio friendly is more of a conservative thing more than anything. But people hear like censorship is communism, and they believe that, and that's what he's talking about.
That is until it's patriotic.
Oh yeah.
Actually,
Sure.
that's a better example of what he's talking about. In that, probably before the 1900s, 1850s, before that, people still believe that being a selfish guy was bad. Somebody who was just hoarded money. It didn't give you a good reputation in society.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's good.
Hmm.
Because
You're
now,
industrious.
yeah, you're industrious. You're no longer selfish. You're just industrious. You're not an asshole.
You're a
You're
job
just,
creator.
you're a job creator, and you are reaping the rewards of your labor. Everybody. That's what everybody who's decent and good does. You're just better than everybody else. That's what. Another one, it would be. It would also be about. War. War is perfect. War is a perfect example of how this has happened. The very thing he's talking about. Instead of saying we killed a bunch of people, well, what is it? They were collateral. We killed innocent people. No, we just said, they were collateral deaths. So it's that kind of thing. Something that should be get a rise out of you by being negative. We just change the word, and all of a sudden it's okay.
Oh, yeah, make
It's
it
no longer. It's
friendlier, like
It's no
how
longer torture. It's enhanced
it's
interrogation.
enhanced interrogation techniques. It's no longer shell shock or whatever. It's PTSD. Give it a nice acronym, and
yeah, that's what he's
it's
talking about.
neutered.
That's exactly what he's talking about. It's taking.
Yeah.
We have a word. We call that
Is it
something
kind of like,
nowadays.
like with the alt-right nowadays, it's like, oh, I'm not a white nationalist, I'm an identitarian, or whatever they say.
Yeah. Sterilization, is that what you're talking about? PW, the term?
Yeah, that might be it.
Symbolic castration? I don't know.
Like sterilization of language. That would be definitely. There's a term for it. I know, like specifically by media theorists. Because the media does this all the time. It's the same way. It's just like the same ways in which everybody knows what you're talking about, but you just said it in a different way, and therefore it doesn't immediately recall the negative the negative meanings. We all know it's a basic idea, so no point in talking about it further. We all should know what this is. We experience this every day, especially me with CNN in the background all day long. So continuing, for Laban, there is a clear connection between this word's images dialectic. Ooh, didn't expect that to be there. And the emergence of illusions, which are the very terrain on which the crowd's discourse is constituted. Quote, as they, the masses, must have their illusion at all costs, they turn instinctively as the insect seeks the light to the rhetoricians who accord them what they want, not truth, But error has always been the chief factor in the evolution of nations, and the reason why socialism is so powerful today is that it constitutes the last illusion that is still vital. The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error if error seduces them. End quote. So, I mean, typical anti-popular sentiment and point right there. What do you think? Agree, disagree, agnostic towards it?
I tend to agree, I guess.
I mean, of course, um, he's anti-socialist, which we aren't, but you know, I
Wait,
agree
who was
with
this
him.
quote? Is this
It's from Le Bon.
LeBon? Yeah.
Yeah, Laban was a reactionary. He
Oh, okay.
was anti-socialist, which isn't to say he had good points, of
Yeah.
course, because
I don't want to think about this people this way, but you know, uh, I also don't want to be naive.
I mean, here's the thing. I think he's wrong in that I do think people really want truth. The thing is, they aren't willing to face the real truth.
They want convenience more.
So they want the name of truth and they want the validation of truth. I mean, like this is just like science and religion. You know, they will deny science so long as science doesn't agree with them. But the moment it agrees with them, oh, they will jump all over it and they will say, see, science corroborates.
Yeah.
So they want
Before
the validity. They want the validity and the acceptability of science, and they want the
Without
validity
having
and
to
the,
change their own position.
yeah, and they want the validity and acceptability of truth, but they want truth to accord to what they want.
Yeah, they already previously believed. So when they find, oh, they think they found Noah's Ark again, they jump all over it. But
I mean, we see this with the left. You know, what are people looking for? Like, what's my ideology? They're not asking what's the truth. They're saying, oh, what theory what person can I go read to tell me that my presuppositions and assumptions are right?
yeah,
And
the answer is none. No one. Unless you're
Yeah,
stupid.
yeah. No one and no one and everyone. I mean, it always bothers me. You know, people are asking, you know, what ideology should I follow? I'm like, why are you looking for something which I mean, the fact that they call themselves ideological is crazy to me.
Yeah,
Who in the right mind is looking to buy into a cult or to join a cult
yeah.
of their own accord and say? I mean, I think even people who
Well,
join
people like
cults.
to be led sometimes.
I mean,
You
yeah, but
know,
even
they
people
like
who
someone to
join
look up to,
cults like do it
identify with a group
because
or
they
something.
think it's some kind of truth, right? Like they either
Yeah.
think that the charismatic leader knows the truth, and so they're just gonna follow what he says because he must be right. But even they, you know, believe that they're going for some kind of truth.
Yeah, maybe. Or they subconsciously don't want truth or anything. They don't really care about that. They just want comfort. Like they want to be accepted as part of something.
I think it has to do with this idea that there can't be truth in life. Your
Yeah.
truth is only your subjective truth, and other people have their subjective
Yeah,
truth.
but if you believe that, then you can't possibly be a revolutionary. Because the fact of revolution is the fact of an objective enforcement of something that's good and right. If you don't believe that, then you can't possibly be a genuine leftist in any way whatsoever, because your whole position is, it's just my opinion, man. And the fact that you say it's just my opinion, man, is exactly because you have no will or desire to enforce that on anybody else. So how could you come? How could you join some kind of like section of society or a group and say like,
Sorry,
oh, I'm part of a
keep cutting
movement?
out. What you saying?
Hello?
Yeah, I hear
Yeah,
you.
you're still here.
Okay, sorry. So I was saying.
You're just robotic.
Sounds fine now, right?
I absolutely agreed with you, though.
Yeah, I agreed. Definitely. I mean, you know my positions. I guess everyone listening doesn't, but
No,
if I
but I
disagree,
was
I'll tell you.
like, what I was saying was that uh, you can't possibly be a leftist and say my ideology is that already precludes the possibility of you being a leftist, because to be a leftist is to be someone who believes there really is a better world, objectively possible, not just and not as an opinion either, because in order for that world to ever become objective, you got to enforce it, and you got to put it on top of people who don't want it, because there will be people who don't want it, who don't agree with you, but you believe that you are right, you believe that you have the truth. That's why you're enforcing it. If you didn't believe that, what kind of better world are you trying to go for? You could be like Nietzsche, like a Nietzschean, and say, "Well, it's a better world for me, so that's why I want it," and that's good. That's fine. I can
That's not
accept that.
socialism.
Yeah, it's not socialism. You're very blatantly asserting this is what I think is right, and therefore I'm going to just enforce it on everybody else and cram it down their throats. Good, fine, fine by me. But even then, you're not standing by this is my ideology, because you don't even take it that way. You say this is my truth, not my opinion. This is my truth, and I'm going to make it yours.
So long as it actually is a genuine truth. We don't want people just saying this is the truth and then making us
Well, no,
enforcing it. If
no,
they
I
have
think
an actual,
no. I'm saying that if they wanted to just like eschew this whole objective truth thing, they could still go for a subjective truth, which is not an opinion.
yeah,
Such that if the excuse is, well, fine, it's my truth, and I'm gonna cram it down your throats. That's the truth. But to take yourself to be ideological is already just a mistake to me.
Mm.
And if you're looking for an ideology in leftism, if you're looking for an ideology in the right, doesn't matter. If you're looking for an ideology in religion, I don't want.
One of
I
your
don't. I don't really
group.
want to be part of your group, and I don't want
Yeah,
you to be part of my group.
yeah, yeah. Anyone could be part of our group, but they have to actually care about truth, not just wanting to be whatever. Say I'm a left com or I'm a Marxist Leninist and I just identify with this group 100% and whatever they say is true and I'm not deviating from the dogma. That's not a good way to be.
Yeah, definitely not. Don't be like a certain someone we just talked to earlier, who said he wouldn't read a certain piece of literature because it disagreed with a certain other piece of literature he'd already read. And I just asked him the simple question, well, how do you know that? Like, how do you know which one is right and which one is not? He's like, well, I don't know. It's like, because you believe in some prior thing? What does it have to do with truth? Nothing, really. I mean, one guy says one thing, another guy says another thing. How do you know which one is right? Well, you got to think. And you can't think by going, well, what that guy said is what I believe. Well, why do you believe it? Why do you think that's true?
Because he didn't come into conflict with anything. It's like vulgar science, how it thinks that, like science, as we think of it, not our science, um, in the common usage of the word science, it's true until it's proven wrong, until it comes into conflict with some opposing idea, it is accepted as the truth. So if you just did an experiment by itself and you came to a conclusion and you didn't consider any other factors, then you would say it is the truth. But if you did that experiment again and considered other factors, then you might find out that there are some problems with you considering it the truth. And that's all we're saying. Like you can't just read one thing and then assume it's the truth, and anything that disagrees with it is automatically wrong. You have to consider it. Otherwise, you're not being intellectually honest. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're here.
All right, continuing.
I don't like it when I talk a lot without anyone interrupting me because I just lose. I know I have to stop myself to stop talking, and I can just like my mind
All
can go
right.
off on
Well,
different
stop
tears and
talking
stuff,
then.
you know.
Stop talking now so we can continue. We'll take your advice since you can't stop yourself. We'll stop you when we
Yeah.
have to.
Good.
The
Go on.
dissociation between the true signification of words and the images they evoke requires some rhetorical devices to make it possible. According to Le Bon, there are three such devices: affirmation, repetition, and contagion. Affirmation, pure and simple, kept free of all reasoning and all proof, is one of the surest means of making an idea enter the minds of the crowds. The conciser an affirmation, the more destitute of every appearance of proof and demonstration, the more weight it carries. As for repetition, its power is due to the fact that the repeated statement is embedded in the long run in those profound regions of our unconscious selves in which the motives of our actions are forged. At the end of a certain time, we have forgotten who is the author of the repeated assertion, and we finish by believing it. Finally, contagion. Quote, ideas, sentiments, emotions, and beliefs possess in crowds a contagious power as intense as that of microbes. This phenomenon is very natural, since it is observed even in animals when they are together in number. In the case of men collected in a crowd, all emotions are very rapidly contagious, which explains the suddenness of panics. Brain disorders, like madness, are themselves contagious. The frequency of madness among doctors who are specialists for the mad is notorious. Indeed, forms of madness have recently been cited, agoraphobia, for instance, which are communicable from men to animals.
Yeah, you were cutting out a lot during that, for me at least. Sounded kind of robotic, but I was reading along, obviously. Um,
I think it's just Discord, frankly. It doesn't seem to happen on. It hasn't happened on Mumble, like when we were doing recording there. Hello?
Yeah,
yeah.
it's definitely Discord. But so what did you think of this quote?
Well, I mean, frankly, so far I haven't had anything to really disagree with him on, besides this thing on language. Because it seems he's, well, engaging the beginnings of the science, the real empirical science of social psychology. So,
Yeah.
insofar as he's like saying things that are based on experience and, things that you and I can see, and I can definitely see everything he's talking about, what is there to disagree with? It's true. It's not completely true. There are have to be other factors to be accounted for beyond these things. He hasn't yet accounted for the subjectivity of the crowd. What makes them susceptible to certain ideas and not others. But other than that, I mean, so far in what he has said, I think he's right.
Mm-hmm. I do too.
Yeah, same.
I mean, we could discuss what's the meaning. What, like when he says affirmation, I assume he means that whatever it is that you're trying to inject into the people's mind is an affirmation of something they already have. So it's a strengthening of like some core principle. It's like the government wants people to do something, and so what do? Well, they put out an ad and they put the Star Spangled Banner and the flag waving in the background and the soldiers saluting. They say, "Do this thing. It's patriotic." And what is most people says, "Oh yes, I want to be patriotic." Good, they'll do it.
It's like the nature of the popular in that it is anti-revolutionary. It does not challenge your beliefs. It's simply, the status quo.
Yeah, he says the concise an affirmation, the more destitute of every appearance of proof and demonstration, the more weight it carries. So if it can just be stated and be taken, the more it can be that way, that abstract way, the better it is. The less you have to explain it, the better it is. And I mean, uh, I completely. It's not just that I agree. I think this is obviously true. Just
Yeah.
look at propaganda. Propaganda works exactly this way. The more immediate it is, the better. If you don't have to explain why, cheering on Uncle Joe during World War II is patriotic, the better. There are allies. It's patriotic. Good old Uncle Joe and Uncle Sam. Just good old friends. And then afterwards, you can just switch the propaganda again and then remind them, oh, by the way, they're communists. They're like, oh, communism.
Shit.
So it's
You pirate MP3s, you're downloading communism.
So, continuing, at this point, we should distinguish the descriptive validity of the features of mass psychology enumerated by Le Bon from the normative judgments with which those features are associated in his discourse. The unfixity of the relationship between words and images is the very precondition of any discursive operation which is politically meaningful. From this point of view, Le Bon's remarks are penetrating and enlightening. So, yeah, I mean, this stuff is empirical stuff, true, agreeable. What, however, about the distinction between the true significance of a term and the images continually associated with it? That distinction corresponds, broadly speaking, with the distinction between the denotation and connotation, one that contemporary semiology has increasingly put into question. In order to have a one-to-one correspondence between a signifier and signified, language would have to have the structure of a nomenclature, something which would go against the basic linguistic principle, formulated by Saussure, that in language there are no positive terms, only differences. Well, obviously there I have deep differences because I'm highly in agreement with Hegel, in which you can't have differences without identities. So there must be a positive element in the things we're talking about. There really must be concepts which can be spoken of as themselves and not simply as differences to others. But that's a bit of a philosophical autism. But hey, blame this writer. Language is organized around two poles: the paradigmatic, which Saussure called associative, and the syntagmatic. This means that the associative trends systematically subvert the very possibility of a purely denotative meaning. To take some of the examples given by Saussure, there is in language a tendency towards the regularization of its forms. To the nominative Latin word orator corresponds the genitive oratoris, which to the nominative onos corresponds to genitive honoris. But the tendency towards regularization of linguistic forms makes all the words that end with r in the nominative end with ris in the genitive, so that at a more advanced stage in the evolution of Latin, onos is replaced by honor. These associative
Honor.
rules, well, it's in Latin, bro. I can pronounce it in as close to Latin as I know.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about honor.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about honor.
Well, yeah, but I
Honor.
want to explain for people who aren't reading this.
Well, they don't have to know Latin.
Yeah, this is about the linguistic form that formed honor.
Yeah. These associative rules regularizing linguistic forms even create, in some cases, entirely new words. This is a rule that Saussure called the quatrième proportionnel to réaction, corresponds as an adjective réactionnaire, and by analogy, répétition, leads to répétitionnaire, which is a term which did not originally exist in French.
Okay, so what's he talking about here?
Autistic grammatical stuff.
But there's a point.
Well, the point is about how language changes. He's trying to, he's going against what Le Bon was talking about. Le Bon seems to have like a typical analytic theory that came to popularity at the linguistic turn of the 1900s with the rise of the quote-unquote analytics and positivists who thought that language was one-to-one with the world. Stuff like Wittgenstein's, the atomistic proposition. Words are really just atomistic propositions. If I say apple, that corresponds one to one with the fact of the existent apple. Uh, Whereas here he's talking about, well, no, language isn't really a one to one thing. It shifts, it changes, it has its own internal dynamics as language, not simply in reference to other things in the world. So, there's things like that. I don't know. Does that explain it more or less?
I know, but we have to explain for.
Well, do you think that explains it more or less to someone who didn't know what that was talking about?
Yeah, but okay. So how is Laclau going against that?
Oh, that he would have just said that every word, regards something specific.
Mm-hmm.
Like the thing he said about like Saussure, that the whole reaction to reactionnaire, um, how that gave there was a repression, the term repression, and that led to the derivation of repressionaire, a word which did not exist, but which was taken by analogy through the structures of the other words.
Yeah, but why? Because when repression became a thing, it became applied to a person. So you needed a term for the person that is repressed or whatever, right? Or repressor. What repressionaire would be the repressor or the repressee?
Yeah, well, it says reaction. Reactionnaire is the adjective form of reaction.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Someone reactive or
I don't
a
use that word,
reactionary.
so yeah.
So, I mean, politically, if you were speaking, it was like reaction, trying to bring things back. A reactionary, then repression, and a repressionary, somebody who wants to repress you. So a new term arises. Although, I mean, the way he's kind of going by it, I don't think it's about analogy really so much as, well, maybe linguistically, the way it's expressed in linguistic terms is, well, it seems to follow the same kind of analogical way. So we'll say it this certain way. But structurally speaking, conceptually speaking, it arises because it's a real structure of reality. You know, somebody's trying to repress you. It has to do with the concept of repression. The active concept of repression shall be, you know, uh, as a description, as an adjective, repressionaire. It's an existent thing, so it's not something that's really just fully arises out of language. It arises also out of reality itself. There are people who are repressing you, repressors. That would be how we say it in English. So I mean, I really don't get the full importance of what he's talking about here. Just seems to be autistic, arguing about language. Because obviously, it seems Laclau's judgment, like qualitative judgment or moral judgment, or I mean, not a common word for people. Normative judgment is based on the the way that mass psychology works. According to the language of mass psychology, has to do with its theory of language, and that part of the reason mass psychology works at all is because of this shifting away from how language should work. By the way, that's something to learn about. Normativity usually implies the rule by which you judge how things should function or be.
Okay.
So basically, he's arguing that Laclau, not Laclau, but Le Bon, if Laban's theory of normativity of language is wrong, then even if he has descriptively correctly described the actual social psychology and the language of social psychology, his judgments about it don't necessarily follow. So continuing, what is most important to our purpose is to stress the fact that this associative process does not operate only at the grammatical level, which was the level primarily studied by Saussure, but also at the semantic one. So semantics, meaning, grammar is just so syntax, structures of language, or at least structures of the words. In actual fact, both levels constantly cross each other and lead to associations which can advance in a variety of directions. This is the process that psychoanalysis essentially explores. In Freud's study of the rat man, for instance, rat becomes associated with penis because rats spread venereal diseases. In this case, the association operates primarily at the level of signified. But in other cases, the association results originally from the similitude of words, what Freud called verbal bridges. Ratten in German means Ratten in German means installments. Thus, money is brought into the rat complex, and Spielratten. I don't know how to say that. Spielratten.
Yeah.
Means
You
gambling.
say it fast, but I said it slow. Yeah.
Means gambling, and the father of the rat man had incurred gambling debts and was thus also associated with the complex.
Yeah. So Spiel means game. Raten, installment, so game installment, gambling.
Sorry, my state screwed up. What page are we on?
26. 32 in the PDF file.
All right.
So, yeah, Raten means rats as well. Die Rate is installment, and so
As we can see, let's continue. Let's finish this one.
Yeah,
as we can see, it is a completely secondary matter whether the association starts at the level of the signifier or that of the signified. Whichever is the case, the consequences will be felt at both levels and will be translated into a displacement of the relationship signifier-signified. So this makes it clear what the whole point of the last one was.
Mhm.
So Laban was saying that there can be a complete disconnect between the signifier and the signified. And he said the more disconnect, the better it is for social psychology, for the mass psychology abuse of it. Here, Laclau is obviously arguing there cannot be a complete disconnect. That the reason the shift can even happen, the expansion of the word to more general forms, and more, becoming more and more, has to be because there must be a real semantic, structural link between it. And so the whole point about the rat man, the Ratten, has to do with the various ways in which this was legitimate. There were legitimate links to bringing these certain things under this one concept or word, such that even though it doesn't immediately make sense to you, it does actually make sense that these things were brought together, or the meaning was shifted towards including something else which it did not originally include. Although I think he's not completely right either. Because, for example, communism, good example. Communism is a good example because communism in America, in the U.S., literally has come to just mean the boogeyman, the thing we hate, the thing that is evil. It doesn't even mean collectivism anymore. It literally has no connection at all to the original meaning of communism as community, something based on community. Why did Marx call it communism? Because he believed in society as communal. that the aim of society and the aim of man as an individual should be to live in community, to experience themselves in community, to conceive of themselves in community. What does communism mean nowadays? It means literally evil and tyranny.
Poverty,
And anything,
bread lines.
and anything that's can be associated with evil and tyranny can be called communist. And so that's how everything gets brought into the fold of communism. How can you call Barack Hussein Obama a communist? Because he's perceived as evil.
Things I don't like.
Yeah, he's doing things he's conceived as evil, and therefore he must be communist. And the greatest evil in America is communism. How can you call censorship communist? Well, because if it's evil, it's communist. If it's not, it's patriotic, and it's not really censorship. It's just lawful, We're silencing the bad guys. It's not censorship. They're bad people. How can people seriously think that Russia, current day Russia, is communist? Well, because they're the bad guys.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, that's
they're
not
the bad guys. They're the bad guys, and they used to be, right? They used to be
Yeah,
the
they used to
USSR.
be. So people don't
there is
understand
still some link,
that much.
but nonetheless, it has no meaningful link whatsoever. So what Laclau is saying here is not what really happens all the time. What Laban was saying can and does indeed happen. It takes a long time, but it can be done. And when it's done, boy, is it powerful. Because
I don't
now
think there's any way we could retake back the name communism, to be honest.
Yeah, that's
Socialism,
how I feel about
maybe,
it.
because Bernie Sanders.
That's how
did
I feel about
reach
it,
to a lot of
absolutely.
people. Yeah.
I don't think the word is salvageable at all, especially in the
I need
US.
to upload the blog. I just don't
I
have a
wish it was, but it isn't.
Well, no, it cannot be, because literally the meaning just has no connection anymore with what anything
The average
originally
people.
it had. To the average person, communism means evil and tyranny, and that is it. You cannot change their minds about, oh no, but this is about, communal living and, the sacredness of society, or, blah, blah, blah. Nothing of that sort. It just means evil and tyranny. And there's no way you're going to change minds.
It's like trying to make Satan identifiable to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You can be a Hermetic mystic, you can be a Kabbalist, and you can think that Satan was actually a good guy, and that Satanism is not actually bad. You're not going to go convince anyone who's a common person to believe, to call themselves a Luciferian or a Satanist.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work. The meaning is so the esoteric meaning is so completely unhinged from the common meaning. You're literally talking about two different concepts by the same name, and you are not going to get the other person to accept your new structure of the concept, which goes against theirs, because to them it's like you asking people to start calling bread cars. Nobody's going to accept it. Nobody. You're insane. You're just trying to change language for useless purposes. Language is set, and you got to live with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
At least in this instance, I'm not saying language can't change.
Sure.
I'm saying in this instance, with the current conditions, the language is set, and you're not about to change it. That most people will just won't listen to you. You can get them to agree to communism, to the concept of communism. You cannot get them to agree to the word communism. It's like liberal, in the United States, social democracy, all those things. You ask people the structure of Medicare, and you say, do you want it? They're like, oh yeah, And then you say to them, but do you want socialized health care? And all of a sudden, it just flips around, and they will say, nope.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you explain, but that's what it was. They'll still say, nope. People, mass psychology and the psychology of words is huge. So I don't think Laclau has... I don't know if he was trying to refute him absolutely, or was you just saying, look, it doesn't just happen that way either. But it's not... Here, it's not the case that it's either Laclau or Laban. It's actually the case that it's both. Most often, it is the case of what Laclau is talking about. But very, very few times, and it is possible to get the Le Bon effect, in which you can completely unhinge the meaning from the word.
And it's a doozy when it happens.
So, all right. Continuing. Since this is the way things are, we cannot simply differentiate the true meaning of a term, which would necessarily be permanent, from a series of images connotatively associated with it, for the associative networks are an integral part of the very structure of language. This assertion certainly does not deprive of their specific characteristics the kind of associations to which Le Bon refers. It implies, however, that this specificity should be located within the context of a larger set of associations, differentiated from each other in terms of their type of performativity. The mistake is to present those associations as perversions of a language whose true meaning would require only syntagmatic combinations.
I think that's a good point.
I think I disagree. The very first sentence is, this is the way things are. We cannot simply differentiate the true meaning of a term, which would necessarily be permanent, from a series of images connotatively associated with it, for the associative networks or the integral part of the very structure of language. Because I think there are true meanings to some terms, and that you can completely differentiate arbitrary connotations and associations from necessary connotations and associations. And you can
I
indeed
don't
speak.
denying that.
Well, I mean, if I don't think he's talking about like this in like the general metaphysical, like logic of language or whatever. So he wouldn't be denying that either. I think if he's talking about regular words, well, obviously we have to agree. If we take meaning to really just be about regular words, but obviously I feel that's not the case for everything. There are certain words which it's not the word, it's the concept, it's the structure. It is indeed a structure, and it is objective, and it is absolute, and we can say that is objectively what it is.
Maybe.
And we can rail against people for not sticking to that. I mean, and we should. I mean, this is what we like. What scientists do is, scientists say, look, what you say by this word and by what we say by this word is not the same thing, and we're the ones who deal with it, and we're the ones who work with it, and we will, when we're talking about ours, and we will completely discount yours because yours is just not, it's not correct. And that should be done, I think, by far more people. Because the regular notions of language will just be shifty and mushy and based on just arbitrary associations of whatever is common and whatever a person as an individual has come to integrate into that concept. But you can have objective concept structures, and whenever you grasp those, I think you should hold on to them for dear life and not give them up.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, I will agree that if we're like trying to say this as about a true language, I don't think that is a true language. I think language, when we're talking about language, we're talking about natural language. But I will say it is a form of true thought. Continuing, this is most evident when we consider the three rhetorical devices described by Le Bon as the means of bringing about the dissociation between true signification and evoked meaning. In each case, Le Bon's thesis can be sustained only by considerably simplifying the performative operation that the devices are supposed to carry out. Let us consider them one by one. Affirmation. For Le Bon, this is an illegitimate operation whose only function is to break the link between what is affirmed and any reasoning that would support it. For him, to assert something beyond the possibility of rational proof can only be some form of lying. Is this so, however? Should we conceive of social interactions as a terrain on which there are no affirmations that are not grounded? What if an affirmation is the appeal to recognize something which is present in everybody's experience, but cannot be formalized within the existing dominant social languages? Can such an affirmation, which would be as in St. Paul, quote, madness for the Greeks and scandal for the heathen, end quote, be reduced to a lie because it is incommensurable with the existing forms of social rationality? Patently not. To assert something beyond any proof could be a first stage in the emergence of a truth, which can be affirmed only by breaking with the coherence of the existing discourses. Of course, the case to which Le Bon refers, affirmation without proof as a way of lying, is not an impossible one, but it is only one instance within a series of other possibilities which he does not even consider. So any thoughts on that? So affirmation here, I'm translating to my own language. So the way I understand it seems to be positing. To just simply affirm something here apparently is not about affirming something that people already conceive, which is what I interpreted earlier. It seems to be positing, just simply just putting it out there
Just stating
as
it.
stating it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just he's just stating something, just positing it as true, or not even saying it, but just positing it. Is that lying? I agree with Laclau here. That just seems nonsense to me.
Yeah.
Because you can just posit something that is true, but which you just haven't given the development for its truth yet. So when he says it could be something that could be the beginning of truth, sure, yeah, I agree with that. Somehow it's reminding me. Well, it's not reminding me. I haven't read Badiou, but it kind of reminds me of stuff I read about him, about like what the event does.
Oh, you read that?
I've read like a really short article on the event. It's not the one that you linked me.
Oh, okay.
It was actually mostly about his mathematical ontology, which, frankly, from that one article, I think is stupid. But it wasn't about the event, but it did mention it a bit.
I don't
Continuing.
know what I believe anymore. Let's just see what he says.
We can say the same about repetition. Some of Le Bon's initial assertions about it can be readily accepted, namely that it is through repetition that social habits are created, and that these habits are embedded in those profound regions of our unconscious selves, with the motives of our action, which the motives of our actions are forged. Sorry. Let me just reread that whole entire thing. And that these habits are embedded, quote, in those profound regions of our unconscious selves in which the motives of our actions are forged, end quote. We could say in that sense that repetition plays a multiplicity of roles in shaping social relations. Through a process of trial and error, it makes possible communities' adjustments to its milieu, a dominated group, through the recognition of the same enemy in a plurality of antagonistic experiences acquires a sense of its own identity. Through the presence of a set of rituals, institutional arrangements, broad images and symbols, a community acquires a sense of its temporal continuity, and so forth. In that sense, repetition is a condition of social and ethical life. As Benjamin Franklin put it, quote, I concluded at length that the mere speculative conviction that it was in our interest to be completely virtuous was not sufficient to prevent our slipping, and that the contrary habits must be broken, and good ones acquired and established, before we can have any dependence on a steady, uniform rectitude of conduct. End quote. Le Bon, however, does not explore the plurality of language games that one can play around repetitive practices, and retains from them only one element, their opposition to rational deliberation. Let there be no doubt. What Le Bon is constructing as an exclusive dichotomy is not habit in general versus rationality, but a habit created through manipulation and one which results from the sedimentation of a rational decision. However, since the rationality of the habit is a guarantee of its legitimacy, we are left with no alternative but the categories rationality and irrationality. Thus he asserts, Quote, the inferior reasoning of crowds is based, just as is reasoning of a higher order, on the association of ideas, but between the ideas associated by the crowd there are only apparent bonds of analogy. The characteristics of the reasoning of crowds are the association of dissimilar things, possessing a merely apparent connection between each other, and the immediate generalization of particular cases. A chain of logical argumentation is totally incomprehensible to crowds, and for this reason it is permissible to say that they do not reason, or that they reason falsely, and are not to be influenced by reasoning. End quote. So, I completely agree. At least with the abstract idea here. I'm actually writing a blog that's exactly on this line of distinction between necessary thinking and or necessary association and unnecessary association, which I had not read anything about this before. I'd actually just kind of gleaned it from Hegel, which and I'm saying basically the same kind of things in a slightly different manner, but look at that, I'm not an idiot. I'm just about 200 years
You
late.
just you just agree with Le Bon.
I'm a reactionary now.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I suppose I could say that
100 years, not 200.
I mean, when he says the inferior reasoning of crowds is based on, and at the end he says, we can say that they do not reason, or that they reason falsely and are not to be influenced by reasoning. So I mean, if you want to be pedantic, and sometimes I like being pedantic, there's a dialectic here. He literally just contradicted himself. He says, look, they reason, but they don't reason. Their reason is unreason. Their unreason is actually reasoning.
Yeah, their reasoning is unreason.
So they do have reason. It's just unreasonable.
Yeah, it's the absence of reason, I guess.
Well, the essence of a certain kind of reason, which is for him, it's formal logical reasoning, argumentative,
Sure.
syllogistic reasoning. But they do have reasoning. They do have connection. They do have association of ideas. The difference is just simply one of contingent association and necessary association.
And the fact that they're just like, they don't want to hear it from you.
Yeah. So, when he says, and they are not to be influenced by reasoning, what
Nothing
he fails
you
to
say
make.
will.
Well, yeah, no, it's not nothing you
influence.
say. It's nothing that you say according to your formal reasoning that will work. You could reason with them if you reasoned with their unreason, which is obviously.
That would be lying, though. You would just be taking their position and reaffirming what they believe is true or whatever.
Well, no, I mean, you could shift them from what they believe is true just by using their own unreason against them.
I don't know.
It's
We're not
it's what
Socrates.
no, it's what sophistry is. I mean, it's how you get Christians, at a church to one day support one thing and the next day support another. Because why? Because though yesterday Jesus says love your enemy, today Jesus says accept the gays. And the whole point is a different kind of reason is going on. It's an unformal, irrational reason, but it is a reasoning nonetheless. It's playing off of just authority. It's playing off. Well, it's playing one appeals to vulnerabilities, but you can reason with them. The thing is, you got to step out of your own reasoning to do so.
You have to use their language, put it in terms they understand, I guess.
I mean, you see this?
But,
you see this?
Yeah, but what I do, even if I talk to someone who's dogmatic and then they believe what I believe for that moment, like I convince them, they just go back to believing whatever they previously believed about it the next day or so on.
Yeah, because they're not really a coherent person.
Yeah. Well,
they switch. It's like they listen to one pastor and they're like, "Well, that doesn't sound right to me." Well, why? Well, it just doesn't sound right to me. So they go to the pastor who says the things that sound right to them. My mom did that.
Yeah, I'm not even talking about my mother. I'm talking about friends. You convince them that you don't support the USSR, but you're still a socialist. Even though, there's nuance. I don't dismiss the USSR in absolute. So don't come at me
But
for that. But
anyways, I
yeah,
mean,
they just say, "Oh, you're a communist. You support the SSR." The next time, even though I convinced them that I didn't, you know. So
yeah, so you're still a dirty commie. But
yeah,
anyways, look at that dialectics right there.
yeah,
Take note. I mean, god damn it. Once you just get used to it, like once you've just practiced it with Hegel, it's so easy to do. So fucking easy to do. And what good is it for? I don't know. I actually don't think it's really good for anything because it just seems fun. It seems fun to see the contradictions. Can you do something with that contradiction? I suppose
yeah.
if you were like if you real I don't think like Laban was an idiot who didn't notice. You can reason with unreason, but you have to reason it with it unreasonably. Which is basically you gotta lie. Since they didn't believe in truth to begin with, and they won't be convinced
Yeah.
by truth as truth, you can convince them of the truth by lying.
Is that ethical?
Well, considering that it's not yet the just state and the just society and the just individual, ethics is
Okay.
kind of out of the question. I think it's it's
All right.
literally an ethical situation, non,
Aethical?
like
Yeah.
non-ethical.
Unethical.
No, not
Inethical.
unethical, non-ethical.
Yeah, yeah.
So it wouldn't be because you're not abusing them. It's just like if they're incapable of grasping like good reason, then you got to work with the reason they can grasp, even if it's bad reasoning.
I guess so.
I mean, come on, like, don't tell me that Lenin and Mao didn't lie to the people.
Oh,
They
yeah, I'm
totally
not
lied.
saying
They
they
totally
didn't.
lied to them. It's like the people.
course.
You have to. I mean,
They had
you tell
to.
them. You tell them. Look, communism is going to be great. Do you actually have a good argument for that? No. Do they actually understand what communism is? No. They're like, oh, land, peace, and bread. Okay, man, we'll go for it. You go with whatever works. It's a little bit of a practical theory right there for all of you listening. So continuing. So it is clear how Le Bon's reasoning is structured. Disconnected, that is, purely associative, connotations are opposed to a process of logical argumentation. The result is that there is nothing we can conceive as a specific way of crowd reasoning. Its modus operandi is treated as the mere negative reverse of rationality, conceived in its strict and narrow sense. The possibility that repetition points to something comparable present in a plurality of instances, for example the senses, for a variety of social strata, of sharing a common experience of exploitation, is not taken into consideration at all. So that's a good point. I mean, so Le Bon seems to think that unreason is completely unreasonable. Whereas what we were talking about right now is
Yeah.
that clearly that's
Reasonable
not the
unreason.
case. There is a reasonable unreason. That people can be unreasonable for reasonable reasons. And they could be reasonably unreasonable. I mean, what is a revolution other than the most rational irrationality?
Yeah.
I mean, it's irrational because it's a breakdown of society. It's a breakdown of the state. It's a breakdown of a whole way of life. Like you've broken the chain of that mode of reasoning, that mode of life. Therefore, how do you break it? Not with another mode of life. You've broken by conflict. You break it by war, by civil war, by whatever revolution. It's a moment of irrationality in a simple sense. But this irrationality itself is rational. It has a rational goal. It also has a rational cause. So it can be rational both in that it has either both or just one of a rational goal or rational cause. And also, I mean, the thing that Laclau points out at the end of that paragraph, for example, the sense of a variety of social strata, of sharing a common experience for exploitation is not taken into consideration at all. So the kind of way in which you will deal with unreason has a basis in a rational structure of society. Or, either they're all poor, so they all know what it's being poor, so you can talk to them in the unreason of poverty, to that extent, being rational. You can talk to them in the unreason of caste, the unreason of class, the unreason of education, or even the unreason of education. So, unreason is not completely unreasonable in that sense, too.
We do what we must, I guess, to get the results.
I mean, that's what I've said. Didn't I write that? Which
Yeah.
one was it I wrote? I wrote one of them that was kind of, that really went into that line. No, it wasn't that one.
The facts. Oh, okay.
No, I think it was about, I think it was about the impossibility of theory. The impossibility of theorizing evolution.
Yeah. The revolution will not be
Oh,
theorized.
Yeah,
and
that one.
I go explicitly into that point. You've got to pinpoint people, what their life really is, what they are like, the kind of people they are like, and you can, if you can't convince them through like rational argumentation, which is almost never going to work in the modern day, that you can at least convince them through the very irrationality which they are familiar with. It's a lot easier to talk to Christians about communism if you talked about them Christian communism. Liberation theology. It's much easier to do that than just to come in and say, oh, we're communists and we're atheists. You're not going to get the Christian vote. You're not going to get Christian people to side with you. So, you have to deal with people and their own reason. You got to take that into account, and that is part of being a practical theorizer.
And you don't even have to lie. You can just say, we want what Jesus said.
It's better if you lie,
in all his proto-Marxist glory.
It's better if you lie, though.
Well,
no, I think it's better if you lie that.
About what?
About being
just
a Christian.
Say Jesus.
Yeah. You say like I'm with Jesus.
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, you just say like, look, I'm a Christian.
You don't lie about what Jesus said. You don't.
Yeah, you don't
inject
lie.
your
Yeah,
views
you
and
don't
say Jesus said it. They could look it up in the Bible or whatever.
As if most of them will.
Yeah, but still, you want to use existing quotes or whatever.
Yeah, but don't like.
By your position.
You can lie about yourself, and it's best if you lie to the point where the lie eventually becomes the truth.
I quote unquote lie every day. No one knows I'm a socialist in real life. I don't go around with a hammer and sickle or anything on my shirt.
All right, let's get through this. We're almost done with this chapter. We might as well. Finally, contagion. For Le Bon, contagion can only be a form of pathological transmission. Its explanation is to be found in the general phenomena of suggestibility, which was, at the time, the deus ex machina omnipresent in the discourse of mass psychology. What, however, explains suggestibility is something to which no attention whatsoever was paid. As Freud put it, my resistance took the direction of protesting against the view that suggestion, which explained everything, was itself exempt of explanation. Also, in this case, a set of questions could be formulated which would undermine the dogmatism of Le Bon's view. What, for instance, is if contagion were not a disease but the expression of a common feature shared by a group of people, one which is difficult to verbalize in a direct way and can be expressed only by some form of symbolic representation? So this thing about suggestibility, needing explanation, absolutely true, which is what the previous paragraph I think also elucidates very well, which is explaining, if it's all about suggestibility, how come the left is such a big failure at it?
Yeah.
How come our memes don't catch on? How come our rhetoric doesn't catch on? How come people aren't falling to our suggestion? Well, because they are not suggestible to our suggestions. The American mind, the United States common person's mind, is simply, what would you say, immune?
Immune.
No, it has resistance. It's like a biological risk. It's kind of logical to a biological resistance against the very ideas of socialism, stated as socialism. Any whiff of collectivity, any whiff of putting the whole before the individual, any whiff of the denial of the supremacy of individuality, is met with resistance, you are not going to be suggesting such things to those people and having them accept it. Even Donald Trump today can come out and say, like, guys, I believe in communism. The American people are not going to go with it.
Yeah. Because they already have their presuppositions about what America is, what it means to be an American. Okay, what did you think about what he said? About the contagion, if it weren't a disease, but the expression of common features shared by a group of people that can only be.
Uh, I can see where he's coming from. I think.
Yeah.
Think more than less. That is, it's like individualism in America. It's not something fed to you by just a trick of social media or school. No, it's something that is literally inbuilt by society into people. It's not a virus that was spread and then corrupted people. People literally are constituted by this very American selfishness.
Yeah.
So when people go, I'm a capitalist, it's not just a false consciousness. It's an expression of what they really take themselves to essentially be. When they glorify the rich, it's an expression of what people here really are. At the core, it's not a tragedy in the sense of a corruption of humanity. This is the humanity they have. Because there are a lot of people who on the left who I think make the mistake of this essentializing of human nature as, oh, we're corrupted. We were supposed to be these artistic kind of things, and no, we're not. We are as our society crafts us to be. There is no corruption insofar as some essential nature has been violated. Uh, Rather, this essential nature has been crafted in this way, such that this is what the American spirit and soul truly is. And until that structure which generates this whole spirit is gone, this is what Americans are, and this is why they express themselves the way they are. Which is also why, socialist ideas do not penetrate into this country. Why rational ideas do not penetrate into this country. Literally, we have an irrational, individualist spirit. So I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of factors to consider, like how the individualist is not one who is on the outskirts of society. They don't celebrate difference, for example, being an individual, but rather conformity and things like that. But you're still an individual. You're just an individual who is within the society, the societal parameters. You are acceptable. Josh,
Yeah,
do you have anything to say? I don't know what to say. I
I
want to
don't
stop.
know. I mean, the whole thing about American individualism is that, of course, it isn't individualistic. It's very based on, uh, like with the capitalist, of course, the celebrity, while it may seem individualistic on the surface level because it's selfish, that's the motivations. Um, Obviously, to be a celebrity, you must conform to society, of course, to become popular, or even if you don't conform to society, once you are popular, people will start acting like you. they'll become like you. You'll multiply yourself, and you get rid of anything that could be individual or unique about yourself.
Sure. And you're also expected to act a certain way. Not
You
deviate
cease to become
say
yourself,
what
you
yeah,
become an image of
yeah.
yourself,
If you
like with
deviate
Stalin.
yeah, Stalin. Stalin said what? I know you were gonna say the quote, sorry, go on.
All right. Well, like we're almost near the end. Like we're literally at page and a half. So let's try to finish this out.
Okay, yeah.
How can we? I'm sorry. How can we explain? How can we explain Le Bon's systematic simplifications of the horizon of possibilities opened by each of the categories he analyzes? Why are his explanations so one-sided and biased? It does not take long to realize that it is because his thought is grounded in two crucial assumptions which have dominated much of the early stages of mass psychology. The first, as should be abundantly clear from the passages I have quoted, is that the dividing line between rational forms of social organization and mass phenomena coincides to a large extent with the frontier separating the normal from the pathological. The first assumption is, in turn, embedded in another which is certainly present in Le Bon, but also in most of the literature of his time concerning mass behavior, the distinction between rationality and irrationality, which would largely overlap with the distinction between the individual and the group. The individual experiences a process of social degradation by becoming part of a group. As he puts it, quote, by the mere fact that he forms part of an organized crowd, a man descends several rungs in the ladder of civilization. Isolated, he may be a cultivated individual. In a crowd, he is a barbarian. That is, a creature acting by instinct. He possesses the spontaneity, the violence, the ferocity, and also the enthusiasm and heroism of primitive beings, whom he further tends to resemble by the facility with which he allows himself to be impressed by words and images, which would be entirely without action on each of the individuals composing the crowds, and to be induced to commit acts contrary to his most obvious interest and his best-known habits. This fact has been observed long before Le Bon. In the words of Sergei Moscovici, this phenomenon is universally confirmed by public records. According to Solon, a single Athenian is a wily fox, but a group of Athenians is a flock of sheep. Frederick the Great trusted each of his generals as an individual, yet he described them as fools when they were gathered together in a council of war. And we are indebted to the Romans for this most apt and universal proverbs. Senatores omnes boni viri, senatus Romanus mala bestia, or senators are all good men, the Roman Senate is a noxious beast. The intellectual history that I shall sketch in Chapter 3 is largely the history of the progressive abandonment of these two assumptions. This abandonment made possible a different and more nuanced approach to the problems of mass society. I shall begin my story from the 0 degree of this intellectual transformation, that is to say, from the moment in which the two assumptions were formulated in the crudest and most uncompromising way, in the work of Hippolyte Taine. Later I shall describe how changes in psychiatric theory and the progressive transference of individual rationality to the group opened the way to a new understanding of mass behavior. Le Bon himself already represents a certain departure from Tainean dichotomies. The highest point of this reversal paradigms is the work of Freud, in which the two assumptions are resolutely abandoned. So, okay, on that last section, the noting of the absolute distinction which Le Bon makes between rationality and irrationality, the individual and the group, single and mass psychology, is interesting, and I think Laclau is obviously right to critique him in that there's good reason, both rational, philosophic, as well as empirical, to think this is not the case, and as a matter of fact, that there is no absolute distinction between mass psychology and individual psychology, that the same patterns of thinking can infect both, and indeed shift both. So what I'm seeing so far from this chapter, I didn't read the preface for the first chapter, so my assumptions is that Laclau is trying to rescue mass psychology from being just this what would you call it, whipping boy or something of the typical right. The right hates the commune, they hate the populace, they hate the masses because they are all stupid and reactionary in their stupidity. So they are the right is politically reactionary because they think the masses will drag us back into the Stone Ages because of their stupidity. So therefore, that's the basis their anti-democratic uh, ideals and attempts. But if we can break that, then we could also break their argument against democracy and against, a positive view of the masses. That's interesting, I think, and it's actually a good thing. I'm not sure that is what he's going after. The whole thing about Freud seems to be trying to break the dichotomy, but probably not in the sense of like a positive one. But we'll see.
Yeah.
All right, we'll finish. This was the end of the chapter 2, so we'll leave it here. If you listened, I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. See you next time.